All right. Hey, Discover Church and all our YouTube friends. We've got a real special guest here with me today, Mike Benz. I heard of him the first time when I watched an interview with Tucker Carlson, and I was so impressed. I was hoping that we could get him on, and turns out a mutual friend introduced us, and here's Mike right now. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, great to see you. And we were just chatting there, and you said one of your jobs was that you were Trump's speechwriter. And I heard it's so difficult to write a speech for Donald Trump. I mean, how does that work?
It's a great question. See, Trump, part of his charm is that he makes up his own mind, and he's sort of like an improvised jazz player, if you will, where there's sort of a theme, but most of the magic of it is the particular variation depending on what he's feeling that day. So I think that authenticity from Trump is part of the magic of what the audience feels, that he's really present, that he really means what he's saying. But that means that the faux voice of a speechwriter is not necessarily as strong in a Trump speech. So, you know, the main thing is he's very concerned with facts and figures. He wants to make sure that he knows that facts are accurate. And so, you know, there are rhetorical flourishes that you might put at the beginning or end of a speech. But for the most part, you are sort of playing Trump speech Russian roulette, if you will, in the sense that, you know, you have only a fractional chance that what's on the page gets read. But I think that, again, is part of his charm, part of the magic of it. So you feel proud as a speechwriter for Trump when he actually does, go with what's on the teleprompter.
Right. Wow. Well, what a privilege you've had. And you also worked in was it in the State Department?
Yeah, that's right. I oversaw the big tech desk there, which is basically our international diplomacy related to all things connected to the internet. So whether that's telecom or data privacy or social media platforms or AI. So all that runs through this desk at State that I ran in
And you were in
2020.
charge of that. Okay. Well, I want to come back to that, but I want to just start off on the most obvious hot topic, which is the July 13 assassination attempt. It just looks like every congressional hearing that I watch was stonewalling. The techniques of lying are just amazing. I didn't know how many different ways you can avoid a question. They're so expert at it, and it's frustrating that nobody is accountable for a possible assassination of a former president. I want to show a couple of clips or angles. I think they're images we have. Can you show those? It appears that there are multiple gunshot signatures, and it appears that there's another guy. Like, who is this in an open window on the second floor? I'm not sure if you saw this, Mike, and obviously this is the very moment where Trump is looking at the Jumbotron. Less than 1 second before the shot, and he turns his head at that very moment. And here's another graphic showing a possible second floor shooter. There's Crook's shot that missed. All right. And then this is the guy that was killed on the roof, Thomas Crooks. But again, it looks like possibly they're saying in this graphic a deep state sniper. Okay, well, let's come back to us. And what do you think about this? I know, they always brand us conspiracy theorists if we question anything, but it's so hard to get information. I mean, that's part of the problem is, why is it so hard to get information?
Well, the trick they use is something called an ongoing investigation. That's the magic phrase that allows the Justice Department to be able to jump on any grenade that might embarrass themselves or reveal malfeasance on their side, which is that if something is an ongoing investigation by the Justice Department, any leak or disclosure of sources and methods or of details about the criminal case are said to potentially jeopardize the investigation by any number of ways, by potentially letting the suspects or potential defendants know what the Justice Department knows about them prematurely, and all manner of rationalizations for that allow them to keep it all in-house. Now, of course, this is basically a lie. If you remember, in January 6th, they had no problem disclosing information about most of the suspects, putting up wanted pages about them, showing footage of suspects and close-ups of their face, so that places like sedition hunters and capital hunters could just free reign, try to identify them and use facial recognition technology and all of that. But then magically they covered up for the January 6th pipe bomber. If you remember, they have 39,000 video files. They haven't disclosed a single one in 3 years. It's been they covered up the actual videotape of the person planting the pipe bomb at the DNC headquarters. They have not disclosed whether or not it's a man or a woman, even the race, even though this person was walking around only semi-occluded with his face for an hour and a half, walking around the fortress of the national security state, Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., making cell phone calls. But then they said, oh, the cell phone data was corrupted, but it wasn't for the other 1,500. So I think that's what's happening here. You have this 1-2 punch between the Secret Service and the FBI, where the FBI gets to seize all the video cameras, gets to stonewall Congress by citing an ongoing investigation. And, the worst case scenario here is that someone from Secret Service was apprised of a plot that the FBI or DHS had advance notice of and was told simply not to be on the roof that day. And we know from Jim Jordan, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, that they were supposed to be on the roof, but someone gave a stand-down order, ostensibly because of heat. It was only 91 degrees that day. That's not particularly hot in the summer for Pennsylvania. But we need to know the name of the agent who gave the stand-down order, because that, to me, would potentially reveal the communications that person received. If the person who gave the stand-down order was apprised of a deranged loner in a Fed group chat, well, then that would crack this whole thing open.
Yeah. And Trump has been very measured about this. I'm really surprised. I mean, if somebody's just tried to kill you, most people would be demanding answers, but he's just been very quiet and been focused on the campaign and on winning. What power does he have? Like when he was president 4 years ago, I just prayed for him that he would address the biggest issue that would interfere with the election and with democracy, which is, big tech censorship. This is your expertise. The big question that a lot of people that follow me, listen to me, ask is, why did Trump not address the gross censorship, the unfair, tipping of the balance, putting your finger on the balance of the election and on information? Is it so beyond his powers to address?
Well, he really wasn't aware. And then when he was, I think, made somewhat aware, did not necessarily want to believe it, for a number of reasons. I mean, so first of all, censorship in the beginning from 2016 to 2019 mostly affected Trump's base rather than Trump himself. It was not until about August, September of 2020, basically 2 months before the election, that Trump himself started to have his own tweets have reduced visibility, have fact checks attached, have these click-through interstitials, or to have the tweets basically be taken down for terms of service violations for questioning mail-in ballots. That didn't happen until 2 months before the election. So the first 3 years and 8 months of his presidency, he, I think, was in a bit of a state of denial about what was really happening. Now, part of that was Twitter was really his engine. Remember, he's an older guy who's he's 78 now, and I don't think he's got the bird's eye view of the internet that millennials and Gen Xers and Zoomers have about looking around and seeing other people get censored. From his perspective, he had 100 million followers. He was having approximately the same engagement throughout. So I think he sort of wanted to believe that it wasn't happening all around him. Part of this, I think, came down to some of the politics of what it would take to confront the private sector companies. While I was trying to alert the White House inner circle about how this was all happening and the scale and scope of it, Trump was doing simultaneous messaging about how MAGA stood for Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon. i.e., that that these companies, these big tech companies, represented the best of American greatness, right at the time when I personally believed Trump needed to be challenging these companies for their censorship activities. Now, I think part of that was from the campaign perspective. They felt that Trump's reelection chances had something to do with his ability to tout the price of the NASDAQ and the Dow and the S&P and everything, being up in terms of numbers. And big tech was really the golden goose laying the golden egg, so to speak, of those stock prices. Big tech had overtaken big oil as the largest sector of the American economy. And so I think Trump did not already had his hands full between Russiagate, COVID, and reelection on the basis of how economically successful these companies were. I think he did not want to take on the additional task, given the limited political capital he had, unless it was absolutely necessary. And I don't think he perceived that absolute need until it was too late.
That's so interesting, because he does need good advisors around him. And I didn't think of it from that perspective, but from a perspective of a social media creator, influencer, I saw this coming way ahead of time. They were censoring me. I was, at first your head kind of spins and you think, hey, what happened to freedom of the internet, freedom of information? But you could see clearly things were recommended, not recommended, things were thwarted. I had, back in the 2016 election cycle, any of my Trump videos were getting 1 to 2 million views. And that's when we had a fourth of the subscribers that we have now. Now we got 400,000. And then it changed. It changed so clearly. And I put, if I can just, I want to read a couple of things, so I want to get your opinion. But I wrote back in 2019, Trump's unfinished business. I wish it wasn't so prophetic, but it turned out to be true that it was unfinished. And I gave a few recommendations in this area, and you're the expert, so tell me if what you think about this. But one of the chapters says, Digital Bill of Rights, Big Tech, and Fake News. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Christians have fought hard for all of these rights because they were prohibited for a long time by the Catholic Church to live out their faith and translate the Bible into the common language. So I said, the first step to defeating fake news is the president and Congress should repeal all legislation related to licenses of newspapers, radio, and TV broadcasting. Licenses were pitched to the public as a way for politicians to regulate industry standards, but in practice, it became a bureaucratic way to hinder competition and protect monopoly. And now that we have the internet, we don't really need that. That was my first recommendation. Is that doable? Is that something that is he can implement in his second term?
Well, I think that's something that would probably require legislative, imprint. That is, I'm not sure if that could be achieved in the form of an executive order from the White House. It might have to go through Congress, but I think that's. I'd have to think about it because there's a lot of implications of it in terms of the broadcast world. But I mean, immediately I can think of examples. For example, do you remember this documentary called Plandemic about? It was a documentary that was very controversial. It was supposed to be broadcast on the Sinclair network, and it made the argument that COVID was man-made and that Tony Fauci and his crew were in on it and that the pandemic was planned, hence Plandemic. Well, the way that they got that, they stopped the Sinclair network from broadcasting it, and it had to be this kind of black market underground internet movie, and that you could only access in the far reaches of the internet. Was they threatened the license, the broadcast license of the Sinclair network if they aired it. And it's a very dirty trick that it is a sort of Damocles hanging over the head of broadcasters on traditional media. It's hard for me to immediately think of a counter argument to what you just laid out, given that most news, I think, today is consumed online. So it's not entirely clear what the difference is when you simply have a broadcast network doing it versus YouTube or Rumble or Instagram.
Because I think that if you go about it the traditional way, like the way they broke up Standard Oil and things like that, it doesn't work that way anymore. You can't really break up these guys with AI, and they're colluding between each other, and the congressmen don't even understand the algorithm. But if you go at it from another way, always go to the money. I think that's the first thing, right? So they are in a privileged position because of these licenses. My second step, I have several steps here, but I just want to bounce it off you. Second step, I'll read from Trump's Unfinished Business. It says, as a second step to combating fake news, all state financing of media outlets should cease. There's no place for taxpayer-funded media in today's world that includes the internet. Most Americans and Australians prefer a balanced approach to news. And in Australia, of course, that's not true. They peddle social engineering, propaganda at public expense. In America, $455 million a year is allocated to the public broadcasting stations like PBS and NPR. With near limitless viewing and listening choices, why would we need federally funded public broadcasting? A truly conservative government would end the waste and let free market operate. So again, I just think, cut them off right at the funding, and then you'll have free independent media. You'll have the golden age, as you call it. The goal of your organization is to bring us back to the golden age of the internet freedom. Do you see any problem with that? What would happen if Trump did that?
Well, you're kicking open a CIA hornet's nest when you talk like that, because the goal of these state-funded media organizations is to propagandize in line with an agency directive. And it's maybe 455 million at home, but we also have a whole syndicate of media organizations, tens of thousands of them around the world, which are state-funded media that are paid for either by the U.S. State Department, USAID, or the Central Intelligence Agency. This is state-funded media has been the magic trick. A third of the CIA's budget went to paying media organizations throughout the Cold War, and it's approximately the same today. It's just done under the banner of CIA cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy, or USAID, or the State Department's Global Engagement Center. But our whole modality of war is about media nowadays. It's since 1948, when the nature of war changed and it was banned by international law to be able to acquire territory by military force, we had to acquire territory by political vassalage. That is, by control over the political ecosystem of a country, which meant controlling the hearts and minds of the people and who they vote for, which means controlling the media ecosystem. This is why we spend so much on places like Internews, which is this giant state-funded news syndicate, state-funded by the U.S. government, so that we have media stations in basically every country to be able to pipe in propaganda. This is one of the first things the CIA did in the radio space. For example, they created Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe, and all of these were radio stations, and now they're also journalist outlets that basically launder talking points from the State Department or Pentagon or CIA to be able to influence the hearts and minds of people everywhere. We're actually moving in the opposite direction of what you laid out. That is, the censorship industry is demanding and receiving more state funds. And part of this is they say their business model has been threatened by the rise of unfiltered alternative news online. And so they need to be subsidized by the government to stay afloat. So the government of Canada, for example, recently created a $500 million media sustainability fund, which is just a way for the government to pay its media ally cronies in order to promote the government's line. We see this happening virtually everywhere. There's a media sustainability fund that the State Department now organizes, and basically it pays off ostensibly private sector media to become enmeshed in the blob of government press release lines. And so, while I totally agree with you, and I advocate for the exact same thing, I recognize the size of the hornet's nest you're kicking over when you advocate for that.
That's one of the fascinating revelations that you give us in all your interviews. Is you're saying a lot of these things that we hear about, like the news fact checkers and the way that they now have a credit scoring system for the news. You're saying that those things are CIA cutouts. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So what the CIA does is political warfare, organized political warfare. There's a document you can read freely available online at the Wilson Center Archives or the NSA Archives. It's called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare. This is in 1948, right after the CIA had rigged the Italian election, the first Italian election after World War II. And it called for the CIA to take on this role of rigging elections around the world, in part by taking control of media assets in those countries to swing hearts and minds in favor of the U.S. preferred candidate. And this was something that the CIA got in a lot of trouble for in 1975 during the Church Committee hearings, which is the first real oversight of the CIA. This is something called Operation Mockingbird, where it turned out that between 400 and 800 different journalists were on CIA payroll, including at places like the New York Times and the Washington Post. And this was a big scandal because it was cloak and dagger work being done by the CIA to rig hearts and minds. At the same time, the CIA was operating on U.S. soil in violation of its charter through things like Operation Chaos, the infiltration of left-wing student movements who were against the Vietnam War in order to tilt them to being pro-war. But Jimmy Carter became president in 1976 and effectively tried to put an end to that whole thing. He fired 30% of the CIA operations directorate in a single day, and then got in trouble in 1979 with the Iran crisis, the Iran hostage situation. Ronald Reagan became president in 1980, and he tried to get back this CIA media power, in part by creating something called the National Endowment for Democracy, and this whole web of cutouts. Now, what a cutout is when something is born of a government operation, but then calls itself a private sector or a nonprofit or NGO, even though it's not really, it's just a front, but it was cut out of the larger operation. Now, this is the way we structure intelligence work everywhere. For example, if we want to march into Cuba and overthrow the government with student revolutionaries coming out of a university that's on CIA payroll, we don't just march in with W-2 tax forms and name badges that say, "Hi, my name is Mike Benz. I work for the CIA." I would have the cover of, say, an academic professor. There would be a center that would be set up within that university, perhaps the Center for Democratic Studies or something. And then there would be a web of NGOs that supply funding, but those wouldn't be called Central Intelligence Agency LLC. That would be a private sector company. It would be a law firm. It would be a shrimping company that might be transporting arms instead of the cargo it says it does. So this concept of a cutout is something that I think everyone recognizes when they see it on the other side. So, for example, if there were to be take an outlet like Russia Today, right? Russia Today, RT, had a very popular YouTube channel and Twitter account that was growing quite rapidly in numbers between 2014 and 2016. And then the 2016 election happened. Russiagate happened. The CIA said Russia influenced the U.S. election in Trump's favor. And there was a huge crackdown on RT and Sputnik because we called them cutouts of the Russian Federation. We said these are not really independent media channels. They receive funding in part from the Russian Federation. And so we're going to x-ray through what they say they are, an independent media channel who happens to receive government funding. We're going to call them an arm of the state of Russia. And that's the same thing with these fact checkers. For example, the fact checkers that you referred to they run through something called the Pointer Network. That's the big umbrella organization through which all these accredited fact checkers in the so-called International Fact Checker Network run through. Now the Pointer Network has 20-some State Department grants. They receive millions of dollars from the State Department and USAID. They directly coordinate with the State Department's Global Engagement Center on the specific narratives to crack down on. So they're cutouts of the U.S. State Department, but they call themselves independent in order to basically fool people so that people think, oh, well, they can't be that partisan and biased. Oh, they would call out wrong facts if they saw it. They're not just total assets of the U.S. government trying to pull off an operation or get public support for for government action. No, but they are. Look at, as you said, just trace the funding, and it's clear as day.
Yeah. It's just fascinating how much we're living under a lie. The Bible says, if you know the truth will make you free. And there's such a war on truth. I know it sounds like Alex Jones, but there really is such a war on truth. What do you think about Elon Musk? Because, I appreciate my X account being kind of turned back on. I don't think it's still the way that it used to be. But there are people out there who just think, no, Elon Musk, to be who he is, to get to where he is, it's almost like Google. Somebody had to privilege him. He's got advantages. Is he part of, the freedom fighter side, or do you think he's somehow is he part of the deep state, or is he going to be used by the deep state eventually with all these satellites in low Earth orbit? Could they just usurp all that and it turns out to be a Trojan horse?
I think that he's definitely on the freedom side. Now, his origin story in terms of how he made it to where he is, no doubt runs through these same networks, although that's not a particularly uncommon story. Take someone like Viktor Orban in Hungary, for example, who is the leader in the EU, most hated by Soros Inc. and by the Brussels NATO establishment. Well, Viktor Orban started his career effectively under the tutelage of the Soros network in Hungary, and then turned against them, came from the machine and turned against it. You can argue it's the same thing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was funding the Clintons and Democrats in New York before he ultimately ran as a Republican and against the very things that he was paying into while he was in the private sector. And you can make an argument that the Elon Musk situation has parallels to that. I mean, no doubt, if you just look at his enterprises, just go beyond PayPal, start with something like SpaceX. Well, my understanding is that SpaceX required Elon Musk to basically broker a deal for the rockets with the CIA and with the Pentagon, effectively negotiating with Russia for these rocket prototypes. SpaceX is a huge government contractor, given that something like 80% of all payload to low Earth orbit runs through SpaceX. I personally had to deal with SpaceX reps when I was at the State Department. They're part of the industry stakeholders that we do external outreach to on the U.S. government side. We are dependent on SpaceX for much of government telecom affairs. You can argue it's the same thing with Tesla. Tesla has this renewable battery technology that's said to be effectively essential to the green energy revolution. You can make the argument that the coup in Bolivia, and I think it was 2017 or something, it was to get a huge amount of the lithium stores that were in that lithium triangle there in South America, and that redounded to the benefit of Tesla, because that allowed the West to seize lithium supplies that were part of the two major rare earths that are necessary for those Tesla batteries, are lithium and cobalt. So you can make the argument that Elon, as a Pentagon contractor and State Department contractor, and I believe Tesla received something like $5 billion in government subsidies when it was making its come up. That he comes from that very force that he is now fighting against. But the fact is no one's fighting against it more. He's, is basically a deus ex machina. It came out of nowhere for him to spend $44 billion to end COVID-19, if you will. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic effectively ended. The emergency state ended when people were free to post about it on X. The fact is, this election cycle is effectively uncensored on X. I mean, this time last year, you had hundreds of thousands of people banned on Twitter for talking about mail-in ballots, talking about election fraud. All of these were banned terms. They were scanned and banned by artificial intelligence, which was being programmed in by military contractors like MITRE and being overseen by government private sector partnerships between the Department of Homeland Security and this web of NGOs and university centers who had all infiltrated Twitter senior leadership and the trust and safety teams. And Elon effectively killed all of that to set us free. And not only that, he even added functionality to the platform, like long form video, the sort of stuff that was impossible in Twitter 1.0 when everything was limited to 2 minutes and 20 seconds, so that not only can we have freer conversations, but we can have longer ones. It's now I'm sure there's still throttling of legacy accounts because it takes a lot of time to frankly just to root out all of the trust and safety filters in the code after Elon fired 80% of the trust and safety team there. But no, I think that he's undoubtedly a force for good. But there's like all things, everyone is large and contains multitudes. And I don't agree with Elon on everything, but the most important things, I think there's no one else in the world like him.
You've made such an interesting point, a real balanced perspective on where these guys came from. I know these people have to be chosen at some point, but when they push too far, and then these people from the inside turn, they become our allies. Really fascinating. I think I heard Elon say recently that with Jordan Peterson, that the reason he kind of woke up is because he lost his son. He said he lost his son. I don't think he died, but he lost him to this whole transgender medical lie, and they put him on puberty blockers. And he's got twins, so I think the other one is still okay. But he just woke up to the fact that they're lying to him, and that they're pushing an agenda that's anti-human. They call him a bad name that they call us now is that we're pro-human. And he says, yeah, I guess I'm pro-human. But that, evil does push too far. I wonder at what point will Trump understand, thank God we have Elon. Thank God he bought X. But Trump needs to use his power when he gets in to really change the landscape. Like, legally, it has to change, or we could never win this. You're the expert on censorship. I don't see how we win it unless we have a digital Bill of Rights. It's got to be enshrined like an amendment, like part of the Constitution. Again, a year before he lost the election last time, through, I believe, all of this machine, I listed, if I can read out just 7 of these things, I said, the president has to break up the tech giants, but you can't do it like the old way of Standard Oil. So I said, you can do this. You can enshrine data rights, give people back control over their personal data, give people freedom to migrate out of any social media, just like you can change phone companies and utility providers, protect communication as a basic need and basic human right, promote free speech online, end censorship by big tech. They are not to determine what is fake news and trusted news. And then stop big tech from meddling in national elections and restore data privacy. These are all things that I think he's aware of now, but he wasn't aware of back then. Are these things that you can see as solutions? Because I'm a solution guy. We all talk about problems. I want to get to the solution. The machine is so big. The censorship is so deep. The lies are just in your face right now. What's the solution? Where can we get to? Can we be free from this censorship, or is that just part of what we're living in, this matrix?
Well, remember, Trump will have very limited power, even if he wins, depending on what the state of Congress is. This is the sort of thing where you're talking about a digital Bill of Rights. That's something that would have to go through the legislature, would have to go through the House and the Senate. Right now, there's a very, very narrow House majority for the Republicans and a narrow Senate majority for the Democrats. And when you combine the sort of never Trump faction of the Republicans with the Democrat Party, you basically have a Democrat majority in both the House and the Senate. But I don't know if you've been following the states of Texas and Florida with their digital Bill of Rights bills. It's actually been quite an interesting test tube baby experiment. Both Texas and Florida have attempted to do at the state level something similar to what you just laid out at the federal level, which was to create a digital Bill of Rights for citizens of Florida and citizens of Texas to be able to bring a private right of action directly against the tech companies if they violate certain aspects of this new Florida and Texas law. And these laws have been, especially related to things like censorship. I don't think it touches data privacy, but I could be wrong on that. But those have been challenged, obviously, by the tech industry. They're winding their way through the courts. I think the Florida one got rejected by the appellate court and is now sort of being narrowed down to to fit that edict. And but it's, those battles are underway in order to create digital Bill of Rights, but they may lie at the state level, so that every state you're in has a slightly different rules of the road for being remediated for censorship activities than having there may end up being 50 different sets of laws on that within the United States, as there are for things like robbery and jaywalking, rather than one big federal law that creates a uniform rules of the road for everyone.
That is the beauty of the federal system. It does become so complicated. It complicates the big tech monopolies as well. I think Europe succeeded, though, in putting together some form of digital rights. They have the right to be forgotten. I think a very basic right that can be done at a federal level is just, the online defamation that impacts things from teenage suicide all the way to interfering with the national election, because they pumped out so much fake news about Trump. There should be a recourse to the way that they can pump out fake news about you, right? So you should have a way to effectively deal with defamation without having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers. So it's like a small claims court. You could create a small claims court for online defamation. Google does nothing. I think we've all been through something like that. And you try to get Google to delist totally, flagrant lies, and they just stonewall you. And again, they probably use this, they're in Delaware, they were in California, then they moved to Delaware and their legal address. And it's so hard to get any truth on the internet. But I think there are some legislative ways, as you say, that Trump needs also Congress. So we would have to vote not only for him, but for Congress to be much more conservative. And hopefully in the next 4 years, they deal with that, because I don't see how, if we don't deal with this in the next 4 years, I don't see how we don't become totally brainwashed zombies that just believe whatever the CIA and the FBI wants to put out. I think that's the danger. And you have the grand perspective of this. Are we really heading to, Bible readers are expecting at some point such total tyranny, total control, that they will put the mark of the beast on people? Are we anywhere near that total control?
Well, we're speeding towards it. That's what this whole field of media literacy is about. See, they came up with this really cute rhetorical phrase about 5 years ago, and it's being instituted in schools, and it's being used as the basis for government funding of media outlets. It's called media literacy. And this term, people fixate on the word literacy, and they think, oh, the government is helping people learn how to read. That's great. We all love literacy. But no, it's media literacy, which means if you don't read the right media sources online, you are deemed illiterate and need to get your mind straightened out by reading the appropriate propaganda channels approved by the state. This is what's being instituted in American schools, K through 12 schools. There's now mandatory media literacy laws in California, in Illinois, so Chicago, in New York State, in Rhode Island. These are mandatory laws that require all students K through 12 to take courses on the appropriate sources to read on the internet, and that they can cite in research papers. It's basically the same tactic that Wikipedia uses. Wikipedia has this blacklist system. You can't cite Fox News on Wikipedia. You can't cite Breitbart on Wikipedia. You can only cite so-called reliable sources, which are places like the New York Times or NPR, basically state-approved regime media. And so they're now working that directly into the kids in order to create this sort of government propaganda Clockwork Orange program. But remember where we came from as well. All of these mainstream media organizations really came from the state in some sense, you can argue. In 1942, the Pentagon created the Office of War Information, and at that time effectively rolled up all of mainstream media into the war effort, and then continued those relationships afterwards. You can argue that the entirety of the 20th century was government propaganda, that we didn't really have an independent media ecosystem. It wasn't until the mid-1990s that Fox News was even there, and I'm not even a fan of Fox News. But the fact is, and we only had three broadcast news stations for the entirety of the 20th century, other than until the 1980s with CNN and 1990s with Fox News. Those were ABC, NBC, and CBS. All three of those were founded by former Office of War Information veterans. And then you add all of our major all of our major distribution media outlets like Time Magazine and Washington Post and New York Times being busted in Operation Mockingbird with the CIA. So you never really had an escape valve from state-controlled media in America until the privatization of the internet. So we're in a really kind of privileged position that it's not necessarily that this totalizing control over information is some dystopic future threat, although it obviously is. It's something that we actually had in this country up until a very brief window in time from about 2006 to 2016, where we were actually able to break free of it and see the world for what it was. And now they're trying to put the wool back over everyone's eyes and get people back in a controllable box.
You have such a fascinating perspective, and I did not know that they literally use those words, media literacy. This was in page 61 of my book 5 years ago. We published this, and it's so prophetic now when you go look at it. It's amazing. I want to read you 2 paragraphs. I literally felt that this was the tactic the left would use, and we would have to preempt it. But they're so smart. The left often points the way. I said in this 4th chapter about Digital Bill of Rights, I said, all students should be taught media literacy. Those exact words that you just said, the left is using. I know one Christian school in Australia where this is being taught as part of the English curriculum. This can also be part of social studies or tech ethics. In the age of information, students need to hone their skills to identify bias, opinions dressed up as facts, and conspicuous omissions of facts, such as in the above case of the CNN Christiane Amanpour. I had this interview where I just exposed what she was doing. Mm-hmm. Such a series of classes can be concentrated into one term or spread out monthly in a monthly class as a critique on local media. This way, students become familiar with the techniques journalists use to sensationalize a story, misuse statistics, manipulate emotions. Students need to learn how the gatekeepers of information break the 9th commandment. I mean, the 9th commandment out of the 10 of Moses, and then hold them accountable. And then I said what the president, should do to address that. That's amazing that they're already onto that. So we're far behind again. And the book is prophetic, but where are the Republicans? Where's the advisors in the Trump administration to say this? If we don't get to the hearts and minds of the children, we're losing the media war.
Well, they're learning slowly, but I'm heartened to see that many are learning. There was the first ever hearing on NewsGuard, which is probably the worst, most malevolent actor in that media literacy space, just about a month ago in the Small Business Subcommittee. And my understanding is James Comer from the Oversight Committee has now taken up an investigation into this exact issue. So it's taken 8 years for it to finally catch congressional attention, but it is catching it. So this is one of these things where part of the onus is on people in the media, is on people with podcasts, is on people with YouTube channels, is on people with large social media followings, in order to educate the masses about this, to elevate public consciousness. And that's what really motivates members of Congress to take action. It's Congress doesn't lead the way. Congress only takes action on something when it's on the tip of everyone's tongues. So that particular congressman or sponsor of a bill becomes a hero because they're responding to a perceived public need. So the onus is on us to create that demand that Congress responds to.
Yeah, so it matters. All the listeners, all the watchers, your opinion matters, your voice matters much more than you know. And we live in this privileged age, as Mike says. We should be thankful to God that there is right now some sort of freedom. We have this podcast, YouTube, even though they censor us, we still are able to talk to each other like this in just real time. We snap the finger and Mike and I are on, and you're hearing the information all around the world. We want to make sure that we keep this up. Mike, tell people about your social media handles, how they can find you, What can we do to help you in your cause?
Best place is on X, at Mike Benz Cyber, all one word, at Mike Benz Cyber. And then also I have a foundation. It's foundationforfreedomonline.com. And that's where we publish investigative reports on threats to internet freedom. These are long-form deep dives on all manner of issues. So check me out on X and on our foundation's website. And yeah, thanks for your time, Steve. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, I know you have much more to say than we covered in around 40 minutes. I hope we'll hear back from you, especially when there's breaking news. I might want to just tap your brain and see what you think about it. But I hope we get to the bottom of the Trump assassination cover up, I would say right now, because I don't see enough information being, they're not forthcoming about it. But you're a fascinating person. I'm thankful for your time. So I hope lots of people go and check out your channel. All right. God bless.
Thank you.
For many years, I've been advising people to prepare by having at least a month's worth of food and water. And I've tried several long life food products. And I've chosen one that I think is the most organic that I can find for myself and my family. And it's called New Manna. So if you're looking for long life food, it's called New Manna. And we have a very dedicated link for this, newmanna.com/Pastor Steve. All right. Their tubs will last 25 years on the shelf, and I not only store it, but because I find it's good quality and it's organic, I actually eat it when my fresh produce run low. So if you use the promo code Pastor Steve, you will get 10% discount. New Manna is owned and operated by Christians who support this ministry and other ministries when you purchase it. So that's why I'm willing to let you know that's what I use, right? newmanna.com/Pastor Steve. I hope that will help you to prepare at least for a month, at least have something. If the internet goes down, the grid goes down, something unexpected happens, at least a month. That will keep you going. Then you can decide what to do. You're going to bunker down, then you need more. You're going to move, then you got some supply. All right? Okay, God bless you.